yesterday we talked about how, in fact, this week how the trade deals are going, and as we've said before and covered before, look, these trade deals that we are going to get with countries that are halfway around the world are going to have be absolutely no benefit to the UK at all. It is going to do nothing. Our closest and trading partners are the EU, and not being in the single market damages this country and businesses up and down it, both big and small. And it's the small businesses that are going to take the largest hit. But we've only been talking about that for what? Since before the referendum, for the past, 4 years now? 5 years? Today, though, we're going to go over an article in The Independent because, as I'm sure of no surprise to you that have been following this. So, Brexit trade deal with New Zealand will have close to zero benefit to the UK economy, the government admits. So this isn't a Remainer study or anything like that. This is the government. This is the department that Liz Truss runs saying this. So anyway, we'll continue because oh boy, there's something. In fact, I'll reveal it now. In fact, this deal with New Zealand could lower welfare of the population and shrink our GDP. Anyway, we'll get into it now. So the government's planned post-Brexit trade deal with New Zealand will have a negligible effect on the British economy and could actually make it shrink slightly and leave people worse off, according to the government's own forecasts. An official strategic outline of the government's plan for the deal were unveiled on Wednesday and says the effect on the GDP, that's the gross domestic product, from the deal will be close to zero, according to the government's own modelling. Fantastic. This fantastic deal Brexiteers you've been telling us all about is going to be worth next to nothing and replace nothing that we lose from the EU. But under one model scenario of a more ambitious trade deal, government statisticians think that it is possible the UK economy could contract by 0.1% a year. They also expect the overall welfare of the UK population to be slightly lower as a result of the deal. A trade agreement with New Zealand could have limited effects on the UK GDP in the long run, with an estimated impact on the GDP being close to zero under both scenarios, compared to the UK not having a trade deal with New Zealand, between 0.0% and the 0.1% in the scenario 1 and minus 0.1% and 0.0% in scenario 2, the document says. However, the trade deal would be slightly more beneficial to New Zealand itself. The government found, noting that the GDP in New Zealand is to see economic growth of 0.14% or 0.35% as a result of this free trade agreement in both scenario 1 and 2 respectively. So not only is this trade deal going to be next to zero, 0.01% in scenario 1, and in scenario 2 it's minus 0.1%. How is this going to benefit the UK? While the government expects a trade deal to slightly increase productivity and gross value added, its modelling also warns that not all areas of the country would benefit. In Northern Ireland, output may decrease relative to the baseline, reflecting a higher concentration of the agriculture and semi-processed food sectors, the document says. Exports to New Zealand are expected to increase between 3.8% and 7.2% under the deal. The government expects there to be a significant increase in imports of New Zealand lamb coming into Britain. Overall, the government projects that a substantial deal will reduce the welfare of the population, the document says. Headline welfare changes are limited under Scenario 1 and are estimated to decrease by 0.1% in Scenario 2. Despite the potential damage to the UK economy from the deal, negotiations were formally launched on Wednesday alongside talks with Australia. A similar analysis has also been published by the government today and expects a trade agreement with Australia to increase the UK GDP in the long run by around 0.01% or 0.02%. Also, a negligible amount, particularly over a 15-year long-run period. The UK economy shrank by 20% in April alone on the back of the corona crisis. The government also admitted in March that its flagship trade deal with Donald Trump's United States would boost the UK GDP by 0.16%. However, the government is keen to sign trade deals with other countries to illustrate the benefits of leaving the European Union's customs union, in which Britain could not sign its own agreements but benefits from collective deals negotiated by the EU. International Trade Secretary Liz Truss said today's launch of a trade deal negotiations with Australia and New Zealand is a historical moment for the country. When we left the EU, we did so on the promise that trading with more friends and allies around the world, deals with Australia and New Zealand, you've already heard this before, basically say that Britain is back. However, speaking in the House of Commons on Wednesday, Labour's Shadow Secretary Emily Thornberry said, "We cannot divorce this debate from that around the still busy Brexit negotiations. The businesses I speak to around the country simply cannot understand why the government is spending so much time and effort trying to negotiate international trade deals for relatively low value when it is yet to secure our continued trade with Europe. When 47% of our trade that depends on Europe is still hanging in the balance, this is where the government's priorities should lie." Speaking at the Commons International Trade Committee on Wednesday, Nick von Westholz, director of the EU Exit at the National Farmers Union, said there is a huge market of 450 million customers on our doorstep in very close proximity. So it will remain hugely important. It will remain a hugely important market for us. Absolutely, we should look for trade opportunities elsewhere around the world in the years ahead, but none of those not even collectively, will make up for the significant damage agriculture will experience if we have a very hard end of the transition period next year. Absolutely, the EU negotiations should be our priority. Once again, the desperate to make Brexit look good. These deals will do nothing. The collective agreements we have currently with the EU are better than the ones the government is currently negotiating. But we told you that, and have been telling you that since day one.